my comment of like George Lucas kind of having unlimited power, right? Was that he's like, instead of being limited to like a desert in the somewhere in the world, he's like, well, we'll just make it red. It's Geonosis, it's red, right? But like clearly filmed on a digital stage, whereas like they had to use Tunisia for A New Hope and for Return of the Jedi, right? So, and there's probably real places in the world they could have gone to have filmed Geonosis, but he was using and leaning into that digital capability more.
Probably
so.
Australia.
So potentially, right? I mean, there's probably some places in the U.S. that could have worked for that. There's some places in, Dune was filmed down in
Moab,
Jordan,
Utah.
and yeah, absolutely, right. So I think sometimes, we've talked about this with Tom Alphen, the brick architect. Constraint can sometimes lead to more creativity than less creativity, right? When you sort of are unconstrained, it can be challenging to build. For creativity to flourish, sometimes you need something for it to fight against, right? Maybe much like the story of the Rebel Alliance. But.
Hello, bricks, chicks, and minifigures. You are listening to AFOLs Welcome, where we talk about all things LEGO from the perspective of two adult collectors. We are your co-host. I'm Grinch. West is not currently here, but today we are discussing Star Wars, the original trilogy. So, as you heard, West is not currently here for this section, but we did kind of record the main topic a little bit earlier because West was going to be out of town, so we wanted to include him in that, and then this way we could wait for the news so that we had, all the most recent news prior to the episode going live. So you've got just Grinch today for the first segments. West comes back for the main topic due to the power of editing, and then it's just me again for Brick Mail. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. So I have been building a couple things. I've been really focusing on trying to get my display done and set up. So there should be a video coming out on the YouTube channel this Friday for my entire collection display. I was working on just a couple of key pieces to kind of finish up the old display area, so it was kind of in a spot that I liked it. So I was working on I completed the Galileo gift with purchase, the Eiffel's apartment gift with purchase, and then I'm almost done with the X Mansion. I really like those gift with purchases. They're small little vignette styles, and they've done a few kind of what I call like historical scenes now with like Amelia Earhart, Jane Goodall, obviously the two I just mentioned, the Charles Dickens. So there's kind of this like sub theme of historical figures that I really, really like. I would, maybe like to see them do a couple of more American history ones in the future. I think that would be cool. There's just so many possibilities that they could continue with that. The X Mansion is good. I think all of my criticism that I've shared on the podcast prior is, still the same. Building it feels really small, especially compared to like building the Natural History Museum, for example. That it was just a lot thicker of a build. This, you're kind of building it like a modular, but it's really only on like 2/3 because the sidewalk is a little bit longer because there's also like a lawn in front of the building, which typically would just be the sidewalk and then the building on a modular. So it does feel small, does feel cramped, does feel like it needed to be a little bit bigger. If it was a budget thing, I don't know, increasing the budget by $100 would have gone, I think, a really long or far way, I should say, with that set. But I'm not disappointed in it. I think it's a good set. It looks good. It looks cool. And it also doesn't necessarily have to be exactly like a modular. It can kind of be its own thing a little bit. At least for me, I don't have it next to my modulars. I know for some people who want to put it in their city, it's obviously going to feel a little wacky in that scale. But overall, definitely not disappointed in the set, but could be better if I'm being totally honest. So with that, let's go ahead and move over to the exciting Lego news because there is there there is quite a bit of it this week. So exciting Lego news. Up first, we have most recently just a battle droid and staff reveal. I think that the set looks really really cool. It looks they did a really good job with the sculpting on it. It looks fantastic. If you are listening to this on Monday, May 5th, you have 1 day left to get your Star Wars deals. I believe they added some additional percent off deals on Saturday. So I think they added a list of sets that were 15% off. So keep an eye out for that, in addition to kind of everything else that they were doing. And then, holy crap, we got like every summer reveal dropped. So Minecraft, Star Wars, Ninjago, Marvel, Harry Potter, Friends, Disney, City Dreams, most importantly, Duplo of that group of sets I just talked about. I did want to talk quickly about the City Arctic train. I think this looks so cool. I love the brick built color scheme and that diagonal line that they have going down the cab of it. The white, dark blue, and orange look really good. It's got a really cool, I guess it's sleeper cab or passenger cab as well. That's kind of got that open style, glass ceiling that looks really cool. Like I could see people customizing this or making a bigger one for sure. I think there's a lot of potential here. I'm probably going to enjoy this one from a distance, but I think most notably for train enjoyers, it looks like there's two new pieces of track I have not seen anywhere where it really confirms what those pieces are. I believe it's pretty suggested that one of the pieces is going to trigger these boulders to kind of fall off when it passes. So it must be like a little bit of a trigger switch track. I'm not quite sure what the other one is. There might be more information that comes out by the time this recording goes live, but really cool to just see, anything new with trains. The price too isn't too bad. I'd expect them to really gouge it. Don't look at price to part. It's a train. It's gonna have a bad price to part ratio, but $210 for 1,500 pieces. But overall, like kind of what you get here, I think is really really solid. And then there's also a call back to Johnny Thunder in it, which is always great to see. And there's these new Arctic wolves or Arctic fox, actually, I think is what they are, which looks really awesome. Glad to always see more animals in Lego form. And yeah, overall, I don't have any complaints here. Just one that I really liked and wanted to kind of call out. There's way too many reveals to go through every single one by one. So I'm just going to call out a few. The other one has me sweating. My God, the Ninjago Legends, the Guardian Dragon. I might just get this thing to like have the box on display. I am in love with this box art. It is fantastic. I've never really seen them do anything like that. It stylistically, it's very different. It's very polished. It's very clean. It feels very modern. It's got kind of just this artistic style about it. It looks, again, I haven't seen this in person, obviously, but it almost looks like it's like matte finished too, which just, I don't know, it just kind of screams class to me. And then the set itself is also phenomenal. It comes with a big green dragon on this little display panel with just one minifigure with Woo, and it's a 14 plus setup, but it really feels like this should be or is geared more towards a 18 plus set. There is the Guardian Dragon, and then they're doing another set in this style as well. So that's really cool. The other set I also wanted to call out was the Sherlock Holmes Book Nook that was officially announced. That looks awesome as well. One thing that I really liked about it, and I think is really cool and I wasn't expecting, is that they have the book nook, right? Which is really meant to be used as a display piece to kind of have between some books. So, like where you have some space between books on a bookshelf. So, it's not necessarily meant to be a like book stand to hold the books together. It's just kind of meant to kind of be in between. The thing that I really liked about the set versus like the Hogwarts Express one, for example, is that you can actually, you can take the book nook and then you can open it up and you just have the kind of street there, right? The Sherlock Holmes street, which looks really good itself. So there's more use for it than just having it be this kind of narrow alley, three-dimensional kind of book hole filler area. So excited to see the future of what they do with those book nooks. I will enjoy the Sherlock one from a distance, but excited to see kind of what else they do. And it's important to note that the Harry Potter one does that as well. It also it does create that 3D book nook, but then you can also use it as book stands on each side. So some other non-release news real quick. We are getting Lego Masters Season 5. That starts very soon, 2 weeks from now, May 19th. So if you're in the US, get ready for that. Season 5 of Lego Masters US starts on May 19th. So we got even more reveals. If you thought I missed it, don't worry, I didn't. We got Technic, Speed Champions, Creator 3-in-1, Super Mario, DC. I wanted to talk about some more reveals here. So the Creator 3-in-1, we got the Haunted House. I believe it is called something different. I'm blanking on what the name is right now, but it is essentially the Monster Fighters mansion, redone and kind of toned down a little bit. It's definitely not as big or robust, but it comes with a werewolf minifigure that looks really good, a Frankenstein minifigure, a new ghost minifigure, which is awesome, an updated one there, and then it's like a witch vampire type of figure. Not 100% sure what she is, but she looks really cool. And yeah, overall price on that one is a little bit rough. It is 739 pieces, and the price is $90. So not the best price to part ratio, but you do get a lot of custom type of minifigures in there. So that's really cool to see. So yeah, not terrible, but not great as far as price to part ratio goes. You do get like a ghost train build and then a ghost ship build, which I personally think would just be cool to see as standalone sets. So banger sets for the other two alternative builds here. Definitely harder if you want to get them and get all three. I think those are good enough sets to kind of be on their own, but hey, I'd also love to see a whole other Monster Fighter series done again. Alas, that probably will not happen. So this is good enough for now. It's really good. I love to see that they're doing that. We also got the beautiful horse set, which looks pretty good. I only called this one out because my wife loves horses, so I will probably be surprising her with this at some point. But Creator is continuing that kind of sub-animal theme that they're doing. I've seen a little bit of criticism for the face, but just remember there's a lot of different breeds of horses out there. This looks like it's got like an pinch kind of nose, like an Arabian horse, not so much like your American quarter horse or like a draft horse or something like that. So I don't necessarily think the criticism for the nose is justified. The alternative builds here are a bear and what looks like a deer. And this is definitely a better deal at $55. So cool set. And I mean, there's also this medieval horse knight castle. I mean, there's a lot in Creator 3-in-1 to really like this go around. But we have more sets to talk about. So let's quickly pivot and talk about some of the Marvel releases next. Really excited for some of these. I love seeing them go back to older Marvel properties. This movie specifically too. Like, sure, we just got the expansion, but that was more just kind of general Marvick comic based, right? We're actually getting more amazing, or sorry, not amazing, but Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 sets with, the Tobey Maguire ones from the early 2000s. So we have the Spider-Man Doc Ock subway train scene, which is awesome. Price is a little harsh, but it's a really cool looking set. The Doc Ock minifigure and the arm builds specifically look really, really good. And it's great to see a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. We have the, Iron Man 2 set, right? Iron Man and War Machine versus Hammer Drones. Really like that set. It feels like those Hammer Drones are maybe a little bit too big. They need to be maybe 30% shorter to be a little bit more accurate, but they look fairly good. Just a nice, small, simple set. I'm happy with that one. Another Endgame set, of course. We got to have some Endgame and portals flying around everywhere. Not a huge fan of the Iron Patriot kind of, essentially mech build here. I do like the Chitauri monster build for sure. I would like to see this $10 cheaper and just get rid of the mech, or even $20 cheaper and get rid of the mech personally, but still I'll buy it. Peter Parker's apartment, that looks awesome. Slightly overpriced again, as you'll see is the case with a lot of these Marvel sets. It feels like this wave. But then we get the Oscorp tower. Really like the tower. Again, price is a little steep on it, but overall, Green Goblin's awesome. It's nice to get an Eddie Brock minifigure, another Spider-Woman, and then, of course, Kraven as well. Awesome looking set. I do like the design for Oscorp. I just wish the tower was a little bit bigger. And then I think this is a really good example of where price to part ratio can kind of let you down or be a little bit misleading, because then we get the Age of Ultron Quinjet. And while it's 1,000, 1,100 pieces and $130, and the Oscorp Tower is 800 pieces and $140, they actually look a lot closer in value when you look at them together. I feel like they should be priced the same, even though there's a lot more pieces in the Quinjet, because so much of those pieces goes towards like the stand and stuff, right? But so many of those pieces are smaller pieces. But I do feel like the $130 feels a lot better than the $150. But I did want to talk about the Quinjet. The Quinjet is great. Love to see them redoing this. And what I'm really happy to see with is the angle that they got that cockpit at. That looks really, really good, in my opinion. Like the stand, for fans of Hawkeye, there is another Hawkeye minifigure. More importantly, for most people, the first Quicksilver minifigure we have gotten since the original Age of Ultron wave that came out back in 2015 with that first movie. And then just the refresh of the color on the build itself. I really like that light gray and dark blue with the red accents. It looks a lot better, I think, than the Age of Ultron Quinjet that we got with the original movie back in 2015 that was white and blue and I don't think it had any red at all. If not, it had very, very little. So this is just a really, really clean design. And I like how so much of that major color detailing is done with colored bricks and not stickers. Obviously that is much preferred when they can do that, and then there is some stickers used throughout, but that kind of bulk of that kind of differentiation and contrast in lines that really add a lot to the ship design are done in color pieces, so that really looks good overall, in my opinion. Whew, that was all of the themes that had reveals. I probably missed one or two. There are so many out there, so definitely go check out lego.com. They should all be up on lego.com, and I'm sorry if you had a specific theme that you really, really like and I did not talk about it, because they're literally everything. I mean, we could talk about Harry Potter, the Quidditch shop, for example. that look good. We can talk about, some of the Star Wars stuff. I think the Darth Maul mech is surprisingly interesting. I don't know if it's good, and then I do really like that new battle pack with the Dark Troopers in it as well. So, ton of reveals. Could definitely not get to all of them in a kind of short 15-minute news segment. So do go and check out the rest of those. And then last but not least, Lego reveal adjacent, we also got the Bricklink Designer Program Series 5 final designs and details revealed. So there is the Adventure in Transylvania. This thing, it looks sweet. For the Monster Fighter fans out there, I really don't think there is this feels like a UCS Monster Fighter set. It's really cool, and I like all the color on it. The red walls contrast really well to the dark blue roof, and then just the black accents all around. Really awesome set. One that has me tempted to purchase for sure. We had the Antique Shop, which is just kind of a nice little set. It reminds me of like those old creator houses that Lego used to do, but like modified, of course, to today's standard of build. I really like what they did with the roof as well. We have the Mushroom Village, which looks pretty kind of quirky and fun and different. It's got somebody riding on top of a ladybug, for example, and really feels kind of scaled down but scaled up at the same time, right? It's a smaller scene blown up, and like all the details that they did there, really nice shaping with all the buildings for sure. And then we had the popcorn wagon. This is the cheapest of the bunch at $55, 600 pieces. As a popcorn fan, I love the popcorn wagon, of course. And then I think my favorite one is the Thieves of Tortuga, $340 for 4,000 pieces. And man, oh man, oh man, this thing has just got some different vibes for it. Like Italian Riviera meets Pirates of Barracuda Bay meets El Dorado Fortress. I mean, there's a lot to love here. It's got a ton of fun little scenes. For example, somebody pouring out a barrel of some liquid on top of somebody eating a chicken leg from a balcony on one of the houses. It's got a nice kind of little, Caribbean fort vibe to it. And just overall, really, really well done. Really well done. I think it's interesting, too, that this is kind of the, we're seeing quite a few of these. I know this is Caribbean, but like tropical Mediterranean Caribbean type vibe sets coming from Lego with the Italian Riviera, for example. I think we're getting the idea set, and then we've seen a bunch of them in ideas, something similar. We've got this one, we've got a couple pirate sets that have kind of come about throughout the last couple of years. So interesting. I think there's definitely a desire here from the Lego community to get more of this sort of thematic representation, this biome or kind of historical subculture, if you would, captured in Lego form. So really, really cool build. I encourage you to check out all the Bricklink Designer Series 5 program stuff as well. So with the robust news section out of the way this week, I think we could go ahead and go a little bit back in time and get West on the show so we can talk all about Star Wars original trilogy in Lego today. Today's topic. When we start. All right, yeah. So today, West, All right, Wes. So today we have a bit of a doozy, huh?
Hello there.
Wrong trilogy, bro.
Oh.
But correct license. Today we are talking about Star Wars, the original trilogy. And just to kind of preface this, Star Wars was actually the first licensed theme, which was introduced back in 1999. Now, we know they've had other licenses before, such as Shell, McDonald's, the Volkswagen, for example, but this was the first full-fledged theme that was a license. This specific sub-theme that we're talking about today, though, the original trilogy, spans the boarding of the Tantive 4 to the victory celebration following the destruction of the Death Star 2. Ironically, one of those we've had a set of just this past year, and the other one we're still waiting for. All of the minifigures in this theme, though, up until 2004, had yellow skin tones, except aliens such as Chewbacca and Greedo, or characters with darker complexions such as Lando Calrissian. In late 2004, yellow skin tones were replaced with flesh-colored skin tones to make the minifigures more realistic and to capture their movie counterparts more accurately. So, West, with that all out of the way, original trilogy, man, Star Wars. This is your trilogy, isn't it?
It's our trilogy. It's
everybody's trilogy.
It is. It's the OGOT, right? Look, this is
but I have a bit
that...
of a hot take for you at the end of this episode, by the way. So
okay, I'm excited to hear that. This trilogy is, and as you mentioned, right, it's the first licensed Lego theme that really has kicked off a huge wave for Lego. And it's something we've talked about in the past, because these days, right, post 1999, in 2025, the majority of the Lego sets that are being sold are derived from a licensed theme to some extent. Now, if you go down your aisle at Target, you'll still see a huge creator section, a huge city section, and a huge friends section. But I would submit that at least over 50 to 60% of the Lego sets that you see on your Target aisle are based off of an IP. Whereas back in 1999, obviously entirely, these sets were entirely IP based. So I think 1999 and the introduction of Star Wars as a theme marks an inflection point for the Lego company or the Lego group in their history. And I actually found a really wonderful article by the Brick Fanatics. We'll tee that up in our Linktree page about the history of Star Wars and its relationship to Lego. And this was actually not an easy decision for the company, apparently, with one exec quoted saying, "Over my dead body." And so clearly there was some heartache, and there was some large concern of introducing a theme called Star Wars into the Lego brand, which had historically been largely pacifistic to some extent, right? Not wanting to promote combat or realistic depictions of combat. It's okay to depict things like fantasy, like knights or pirates, but when it came to things like wars, they were trying to stay away from that. So this was, I think, a little bit more controversial than people give it credit, kind of in hindsight, or now that it's 2025. But a big move for the Lego group, and a very exciting series to dive into. And as you mentioned, this specifically, the original trilogy, has been in the Lego genre since 1999. So, oh boy, what a blast from the past, looking at all of the sets that, spanned everything from episode 4, 5, and 6. So,
well, I think that's a really good point, because one thing I noticed when preparing for this episode was just how many subtypes, I don't know if there's an official Lego word, a sub theme, if you would, of a sub theme, a micro theme within a sub theme, because the sub theme in some cases is episode 4, episode 5, episode 6, right? But then you also get the helmets, you get the dioramas, you get keychains, brick sketch, brick heads, planet series, ship series, the UCS, master builder, battle packs, microfighters, Technic, minifigure packs. And there's more too. I mean, that's not everything, right? But most notably, there's no CMF here, right? Of course.
Yeah.
But it really seems like either some of these, like, for example, the helmets or the dioramas, start with Star Wars and maybe branch out to another theme, or they start with another theme and then definitely come to Star Wars, right? I mean,
Mhm.
how many times have
Mhm.
we said,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is a baby minifigure battle pack"? We coined that term battle pack, almost like UCS, right? I mean, there is no
Mhm.
ultimate collector series sub theories that is in any other theme but this, but there are still quote unquote, oh, the UCS
Hogwarts
Milano, right?
Express.
The UCS Hogwarts Express. It's not called a UCS, it's called a collector's edition or something like that. But the Ultimate Collector series started here, stays here, and was coined here. I think the only real exception, and I'll say it, other than CMF that we haven't seen yet would be maybe modulars, because it doesn't really fit in Star Wars, but I'm sure somebody has made a modular Mos Eisley Cantina for their Lego City display.
Absolutely. And that's an interesting point because you mentioned something like the UCS almost transcending the Star Wars genre, even though it is a Star Wars specific thing. And I would say, even to the extent that we see sets with anything with a plaque, right? We can kind
Mm-hmm.
of trace the lineage of that back to the UCS series with Star Wars kind of maybe, and I'd have to go back to check if those were the first official sets to have a plaque like that, but
Yes.
certainly the first kind of line of sets to popularize in mass
Mm-hmm.
that expectation of this is a collector's item. There's a stand associated with it, and there's that black plaque piece that goes along there. Previously stickered, now is printed. I know that's been kind of a big push for the community that Lego has, agreed to. But we see that now outside of the Star Wars brand too. So that's very exciting to see.
Well, and I think let's break that down there, right? Because there's two kind of sub, if you would, UCS sets. Obviously, there's UCS and there's Master Builder, right? Which was another little bit of maybe controversy within the UCS sub theme, which really started back with, was it, I think, probably the worst UCS set of all time, the Echo Base, which was a big disappointment and some inspiration as for why we don't cover leaks on this channel. But one that I think certainly left a lot to be desired out there as far as a UCS set goes, because it was just a bunch of small micro builds. Maybe some similar criticism that I had for like the Shire recently, right? But that kind of kickstarted a new master builder, quote unquote, set line, which was the uh, Cloud City, for example. Most recently, the Mos Eisley Cantina. So, what do you think
hmm
of the kind of differentiation there?
I don't know if it's necessary, to be honest. I think most of us just see those and associate them with the UCS series. So
Mm-hmm.
I think people always sort of assume or associated UCS largely with ships, although we know that that's not necessarily the case, right? There was the Darth Maul bust, the Yoda at one point, so there have been buildable figures within the UCS line, and certainly we've seen buildable figures since then take on its own sort of specific, sub theme within Star Wars. But I think the distinction between UCS and Master Builder is just that it's a technicality, right? But I don't know if
Yeah.
it's uh, extremely meaningful one, because that is kind of we aren't going to get a better Mos Eisley Cantina than the one, unless in 20 years Star Wars revisits it, right?
You
Lego and
say
Star
that,
Wars
but
asked. Well, yep, we know how fast we get another Luke land speeder, right? So we're due for one any day now. But right, this is I think an important point, which is just this is the best. This is a highly detailed version of this set piece, and I think that is where a lot of the controversy from Hoth Echo Base comes from, which is that on its own didn't necessarily feel like
mm-hmm.
it was living up to that level of expectation or put togetherness, if you will. So grandeur.
Well, and I think I think the Lego group doesn't really know what to do with Master Builder either, right? Because within the original trilogy, and it's definitely worth noting that, for example, there have been, what is it, 41 Ultimate Collector Series sets, and
Hmm.
33 of those have been original trilogy based, so like really, really heavy focus, right? But then there's still only been two Master Builder sets, so they kind of introduced it, but then kind of. I mean, the last one we got was what, like 3 years ago now, 4 years ago now. So is the intent to come out with one every 3 years? Because maybe there's rumors of some sets later this year that could fall in that line. So it does kind of feel like Lego themselves, like you said, it's maybe more semantics. They don't really know what to do with it there.
Yeah, and I don't really know where it would fit in other genres outside of the original trilogy. I mean, you could. I'm sure we could sit there and rattle off
Camino,
set pieces
Jedi
that would be
Temple.
interesting. Absolutely right. You could say like like Naboo Theed, or you could do like a
Hmm.
Geonosis Arena or something like that, right? But I think it's an interesting branch, but I also think it's a tough one for Lego to explore because it's hard to pick a specific location and do that location justice in a meaningful way, right? Um,
Right,
and it's also challenging because Lego's done sets usually of those things in the past anyways, and so
right.
it's if they were to do something on Endor, for example, they've already done a whole series of Endor sets, so it would really have to kind of raise the bar. It would be certainly very expensive, very large, so it's a challenging theme for I think Lego to continue to work towards ultimately.
Right. And we've certainly seen Lego kind of change over the years too. Like back when they did Endor and Ewok Village, those definitely felt like less of a UCS set and more of a kind of quote unquote master builder set before they named that. But now the level of technicality and detail is so much better that it's kind of like I kind of
Yeah.
argue that Cloud City and even Mos Eisley are more akin to a Ultimate Collector series than a Master Builder series, right? I mean,
Well, right,
it,
and that's where I think it's like splitting hairs, right? And it's just to your point,
right.
like it's semantics, and it's like what 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 is the point to make that distinction? Is the distinction the fact that one is like the UCS series are trying to go for model esque realism, right?
Hmm.
Because if that's the distinction, I wouldn't necessarily disagree that well, maybe the distinction is the fact that it's meant to be designed to like a minifigure scale, right?
Right. Well, but what about like the
Because
X-wing,
we
for example? Because your
what about what?
classic minifigure scale X-wing is minifigures, like is closer to minifigure scale than the UCS.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I think what I'm saying is like the Mos Eisley Cantina is clearly designed around the minifigure as sort of its scale focal point, right? Whereas something like the
Got it.
TIE
Yeah.
Interceptor we got last year, or for example, Jabba's sail barge, right, included minifigures in it, right? And that's maybe a bad example. Maybe Jabba's sail barge is a good example of how there's really the lines are very blurred, right? But my kind of thought process here is take the Imperial Star Destroyer, and it comes with two Imperial officers as kind of a side, hey, here's inclusion, right? But it wasn't
Hmm.
ever built around the minifigure as the focal point. Whereas something like Bespin or Cloud City rather, or Mos Eisley Cantina was kind of designed around the minifigure and the interaction of minifigures in more of a playable way than those sets that are sort of really designed to be models, right? But again,
Hmm.
Jabba's sail barge is kind of tough because it's both playable but also very much a model. So, this line of this dichotomy isn't perfect, and ultimately, at the end of the day, even it gets blurred, I think. And that's why I think Lego hasn't made much of an effort to sort of continue down that road.
Right. Well, that's just a kind of sub segment of the sets, right? We know overall, and I want to kind of give a disclaimer here because um, the data with this was a little bit tricky. In totality, what we kind of came up with was 261 Star Wars sets, kind of encompass this idea of a quote unquote original trilogy sub theme. We
Right.
talked a little bit about the UCS, but there's a ton of other sets, and while we can't get through every single set, the way we kind of got to that sub theme was just by looking at the sub themes, and then I actually went in and manually pulled out the prequel sets and sequel sets and expanded universe sets, because when you look at just episode 4, 5, and 6, those sets are very specific. But then you have stuff like the helmet series, the diorama series that are obviously that's Luke Red 5 helmet, like that's a episode 5 set. So the data and kind of what we're encompassing with our discussion is all of that, right? So
Right.
Wes, what are some of the, let's hit the highlights here. What are some of the notable sets in your mind?
So notable sets that we called out were the 2002 Cloud City set, the UCS Millennium Falcon from 2017, Bespin Duel from 2020, and maybe not
I
necessarily
cheated.
exclusive. Yeah, maybe not necessarily exclusively a set, but a Chrome Gold C3PO. So Grinch, what are your thoughts there on all of those sets? It's interesting. We got two
Well,
Cloud Cities and the UCS Millennium Falcon.
right. So for me, the Cloud City speaks for itself, right? It it's one of the most expensive Lego sets of all time. It introduced a skin tone colored flesh or skin tone colored minifigure, right? Accurately, it for all extensive purposes is kind of a really ugly set. I mean, I remember seeing it like in the catalog as a kid and just kind of being like, come again? Like
Yeah.
what?
See, that's
This looks
funny because
overpriced and
I don't remember this set.
okay.
This one is like a black hole in my memory.
I distinctly remember it because it was, the set itself is just kind of like a long hallway, and you get like a
Right.
scene here, a scene in the middle, a scene in the end, and then a landing platform. And I think, yeah, it was just this. It was a very weird and kind of different set for Lego at the time because there wasn't a lot of like these play scale Star Wars. So much of what they did at that point was ship based, right? So this was one of the kind of first, play scale sets that wasn't just the Endor speeder bike chase, for example, where it was like a tree and a speeder bike. I mean, it's still kind of
Mm-hmm.
vehicle, based, right? Because the focus was the speeder bike, not the tree. In this case, the focus was the inside of Cloud City.
Right. Right. But like you mentioned, very bare, but I think a foundational set because I would argue that that type of set kind of set the tone for larger scene based sets in the future, right? And we've seen a lot of hallways, Star Wars hallways depicted in Lego since then. And so I think still a meaningful set. We threw the UCS Millennium Falcon on the list. What kind of stands out for you about that set?
Yeah, I mean, I think this one, if Star Wars as a whole kind of represented modern Lego or this kind of turn from what I would maybe coin as like classic or vintage Lego to more modern. I think the
Mm-hmm.
Millennium Falcon is really this kind of postmodern era, if you would. It's a $850 set, right? 7,500 pieces, 1-to-1 scale. Not necessarily the first time they did that, but this kind of became a cornerstone pillar. And I know, previously they had like a 5,000 piece Millennium Falcon, but this one came out and was sold out. it was just always sold out. It's also interesting that it's been on the shelf for 8 years and may or may not retire at the end of the year. They keep pushing
Yeah.
it, right? So it's really, I think, kind of represents this kind of modern turn of like this really large focus set. And I think it was definitely a a a moment in time where kind of maybe somebody said no, we can't make a set that's big, and somebody else said no, I'll die on this hill, right? Like kind of like we said with the Star Wars at the beginning of the episode, where they said it was going to ruin Lego, right? So that's kind of how I felt about it. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting set because it's hyper realistic, right? And like you said, it's heavily scale based. If you've built it, you'll know that a lot of the interior of the set is designed. It's scaffolding almost, right? It's just frame,
Mm-hmm.
Technic frame, and you're layering things on, and in some cases, literally like there's these two Technic pieces that go into a Technic beam, and that's all that's holding, two Technic axles going into a Technic beam, and that's all that's holding on like this large section of the ship. And things are kind of just laid on top of it and are allowed to sort of drape over the frame of the ship in a really interesting way. But they to an incredible level of detail capture the size, the accuracy of the external features of the ship, and have some really nice vignettes on the inside of the ship. I am a little disappointed. There's one section of it that's extremely empty and bare that I really think they could have filled in a more meaningful way. Um, Other than that, I'd say it's a near perfect model for an adult. It's gigantic,
Mm-hmm.
so big. What's also really interesting of it is it's kind of it's dated to some extent because it's not only designed around the original trilogy, but it also includes characters from The Force Awakens, which is interesting
Right.
because I think Lego and Disney and Star Wars thought that the sequel trilogy would do better than it ultimately did at the time, and you can kind of sense some of that energy as they included some really iconic characters, older Han Solo, right, Finn,
Mm-hmm.
Ray, and ultimately the series kind of just doesn't really
But
pan
then their
out.
episode 5 counterparts too, right?
Yeah, and oh my gosh, what a great inclusion of minifigures, and you have the post Hoth Princess Leia and Han Solo, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's such
Minox.
a the Minox, yep. So it's a really fun build. I mean, you really just can't get better than that. I do sort of envision someone sitting there at like the Lego boardroom, and they're like, "Hey, like let's push the envelope here. This is going to be because it wasn't $850 originally, right? I think it was like 700 or close to that. The price
Yeah,
jumped up
they did have a
considerably
price
after
increase, didn't
COVID,
they?
and the set of inflation that kind of hit. And so it's interesting to see how we sit here and we hear $850 and it's like, oh my gosh, that's crazy expensive. But and I won't give away what's the rumor, but or what the subject of the rumor is, but there's a rumor that this year we could see our first $1,000 Lego set,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's just insane to be thinking of Lego at that scale. Um, I'm still trying to wrap my head around a $1,000 Lego set, let alone purchasing that. I mean, I need to go buy new car tires. That'll get me most of the way towards that purchase. Or I could go buy a large Lego set. it's just, it's a lot of money. It's really interesting. I almost feel like Lego's a little like Icarus at the moment, and like maybe they're gonna fly a little too close to the sun here with the $1,000 Lego. Maybe this will finally be the thing where everyone's like, no, that's too much. But we'll see.
Well,
We'll see. So
I think that's interesting because your next set that you put on the list specifically, like this is one you advocated for on the notable set list, was Bespin Duel. And you're kind of talking about how, maybe Lego might be Icarus and flying a little too close to the sun, but, share with the listeners your opinion on the Bespin Duel because it's kind of counterintuitive and contrary to kind of that point you just made, right?
I mean, it is and it isn't, right? Because I think this is an iconic set for Lego and the Lego Star Wars line, because it so perfectly captures that movie moment. Which, as I brought it up, I said, probably the most iconic scene in Star Wars, and you're like, no, it's one of the most iconic scenes in cinema, and you're not wrong, right? The
Right.
reveal of the relationship between Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. If you have not seen the movie at this point,
Spoiler
I won't
alert.
spoil anything.
He's his father.
Right, but it's huge, and I think it so perfectly captures that moment. What I think is notable about it, right, was this was a Comic-Con exclusive for 2020, which we know, I believe, ultimately got canceled. And so then Lego effectively put this out as like a weird raffle thing on their website, and there was some controversy, and
Was it a
ended
raffle
up
or they
being,
just were like, "Hey, it's available," and then good luck?
and maybe that was it. There was an
Yeah, and then
odd,
it's just like, "Bye, okay, it's sold out.
yeah.
Good
and
luck."
and and this kind of hits on sort of a larger issue with sort of those collectible, things, right? Where I think this set was maybe controversial is it's such an iconic scene. To make it in such a limited run, I think was a real shame for Lego, because I think
Mhm.
this could have just been a normal set and would have sold extremely well for them. So I ended up picking up one on the secondary market a few years later. I think I paid almost $100 for it. We just checked Brick Economy tonight, and it's worth around $150. So
It's really not gone too crazy expensive, has it? Because I think they maybe
no,
produced
that's
more
maybe a
because
little
they did.
disappointing.
I think they produced more of them because quite a few. Typically, the Comic Con sense they do like a limited of like 10,000, and like I mean I've got like
Right.
an Age of Ultron set that's worth a ridiculous amount of money, and there's nothing exclusive in it, but it's just a Comic Con set, you know.
Hmm.
So I think there's quite a
One,
bit out there.
and it's an odd. It sort of represents that weird relationship that Lego and Lego Star Wars has with exclusivity to some extent, because
Hmm.
um, again, there's nothing really exclusive about this scene. At the time, it had an exclusive Darth Vader, right? This was one of the first Darth Vaders that we got with like some really great arm printing detail. Since then, we've seen him in some of the final duel sets, and I think most notably or lately in that Obi-Wan Kenobi Darth Vader set from the movie. They're kind of duel in
Right.
the lava field or whatever that was. So, um, yeah, Bespin Duel. I still think it's a very
So
notable set. I think it's a very cool set. But Grinch, you also added the Chrome Gold C3PO.
yeah, I cheated. This is technically a promotional set and it was a promotional exclusive set, so it would have been excluded from our list because I did remove promos. Um, but I included it because, like you said, with the Best Bin Duel, right? And kind of where I was going at with that of like maybe Legos flying too close to the sun is there's still some semi-obvious stuff or there's still some stuff they really haven't quite milked yet. For example, the most iconic scene in Star Wars. They have not done that yet, right? We'll get to it, but like Luke's lightsaber that they did as a gift with purchase, or Yoda's lightsaber that they did with gift with purchase. There's
Mm-hmm.
still some very kind of obvious hits that they could have. So on one end, they're pushing the envelope, but on the other end, we could get a forced ghost of Obi-Wan, and people would be extremely happy with that, and Star Wars OT would be back, baby. um, but I did include this one on here, the Chrome Gold C3PO, because there was 10,000 of these available, and you had to buy one of was it the 30th anniversary of Star Wars sets back from 2007. So it was the 30th anniversary of Star Wars. It was like one of the first kind of
Mm.
anniversary sets that they did. They came out with another Tantive 4 Blockade Runner. They had a little kind of red frame on part of it, little dark red accent that said like 30th anniversary. And if you got a set, you had a chance of essentially pulling this minifigure from it, and it became
It
this
was kind of
notorious
a
chase minifigure. And yeah, it
Wonka's
was
golden ticket.
right, golden 3PO. But
Mm-hmm.
it does kind of represent, in my opinion, just the like craziness of Star Wars minifigures, right? You've got Cloud City Boba Fett that we kind of talked about through Cloud City already, but then you do got these just one-offs like the Chrome Vader, Chrome Stormtrooper, right? So for me, I think this Chrome Gold C3PO kind of captured that pretty well. So I did
Yeah.
cheat, but definitely notable for that reason, right? Like Super Chase minifigures here.
One, it's interesting because on all of the chrome figures, one of the odd things about them is when they sprayed the chrome on, they did it with the arms attached to the minifigure. And so they
Mm-hmm.
all have like a small patch where there's no chrome where their arm was blocking it, which I think is just odd. And then you brought up the Force Ghost thing, and I don't remember the source, so I apologize because I'm gonna throw this out there without a reference, but I believe there was an interview with a Lego designer, and he was talking about the challenge of making see-through pieces. And they're like, we've tried, or we've mocked this up, but I think it's missing the point, right? Like, we've seen now pearlescent colors in Lego. Um, one of the best examples is the Santa's visit set had some of those pearlescent pieces in it.
We've seen transparent minifigures with the Orion from the CMF Space series, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. And we're seeing more translucence sort of being added into these minifigures. Their concern was like if the torso was translucent, you would see like the the pegs from the legs, going into the body and stuff like that. And they're like, it just looks really weird when you can see through the thing. And it's like, okay, well, doesn't need to be perfectly see throughable, right? Like if you had a pearlescent blue, like light
Mm-hmm.
blue, that's a pretty good stand-in for a Force Ghost, right? Maybe add like a dual molded leg where the tip of the leg is clear or something like that, or
Or give it neon glow in the dark paint. So when you turn out the lights, you just see the outline of the Force Ghost.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a lot of ways that they could kind of get after that, but I think you're right. And when you mentioned the lightsabers, I think well, to kind of jump ahead, we're gonna eventually talk about missing sets, and I think that's something that we definitely need to speak to there. So, but not to get
So
ahead of ourselves.
before we go to missing sets, let's quickly just talk about some of our favorite sets because it might be a untraditional list here. I'm going to get this one out of the way up front because it's like very anticlimactic, but the original Snowspeeder is
Yeah.
one of my favorite sets. I've talked about it before of like it was just one of my like core memory Christmas memories as a kid was like getting that as like one of my first
Hmm.
Lego sets ever. We had Lego, like just loose Lego, but we didn't always get new sets, and so one of the first sets I got was that original Snow Speeder. So it will always have a good place in my heart, and it's not a huge set. It's not. I mean, it's nothing special. Still have it in the basement, my basement right now. So it's just a special set for me. But West, we can do a little bit better than that. So why don't you
We
go
can,
ahead?
but I will mention the newest snow speeder that we got for the 20th anniversary of Lego.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you compare it to the
It
2002 snow
slaps.
speeder, they're pretty similar still. It's not pushing the boundaries of Lego
Right,
construction.
right.
You know what I mean?
There's more different between the original X-wing and the latest X-wing, for example, than
Hmm.
that snow speeder in the original, right? UCS is a whole different
Or the
conversation,
original
but
play scale Millennium Falcon versus the newest, the Dark Falcon being probably the the most latest example of like a play scale Millennium Falcon.
I'd say there's not a lot of well, that first play scale, the episode 4 one used those big kind of quarter
Yep.
dish pieces. That one
Yeah.
between the Hoth one and the I think the was it episode
Fair.
7 one
Fair
before
point.
they did
Yeah.
the episode 9 one. Those were pretty much all the
Yeah.
same.
No, no, no. That's a fair point. So the other two that we had on here was the Ewok Village and Cloud City from 2018. So Grinch, do you want to talk through the Cloud City real quick?
Yeah, and we talked about this on the show before, but it may be, dude. Do I need to get a therapist? Is something wrong with me? Like, I don't like the original Cloud City, and I like this Cloud City, which I think would be the opposite take
Every
that most people have.
everyone's allowed to have their preference, Grinch. So
But I just, it might be a bit of a hot take. I just really like this Cloud City because it did exactly what that original one's doing, but better. We got the Bespin Duel on it, which is arguably maybe a tier down from that full fledged set. We got the Carbonation Chamber, which was pretty much identical to the Carbonation Chamber set. We got a really nice Slave One. We got a really nice dining room scene. The
I don't
only
know if I'd call
time
the slave one nice. I think that's a bit of a
for the
stretch.
scale, it's done really well technically for the scale. Um, I'd say it's
Sure.
better than the Mandalorian one that we got. Maybe a hot take as well. But we got the dining room, so we've never gotten that scene before, right? And so there's just so much playability and interest, and as the listeners know, I really like to display my sets, and for me, this is just a really good set that you can put on display, and then you can turn it, right? You can
Yeah.
show these different scenes in it. There's a lot of kind of value here. It also came with like every minifigure that you needed from that,
Hmm.
master builder series. So it did come with
The
every single
the
minifigure you
minifigure.
needed. It's one of the few
Yeah.
times we got a cloud car. It really is, in my case, the ultimate,
Right.
collector's edition of Cloud City because you get everything there, right? So I think in 10 years, time will be a lot nicer to that set than it was originally.
I think it's a fantastic set. And what I really like about this set piece of Cloud City is if you go back to the original trilogy before we saw the sequels and the prequels and the spectacle of those, right? Cloud City stood out in Star Wars because it was clean, but it wasn't the Empire completely. And
Mm-hmm.
of all the set pieces, right? Like we got the desert, we got the jungle, we got the forests of Endor. This was like its own distinct thing. It's the city floating in the clouds. It was such a unique set piece for the Star Wars series at that time. Nothing else really, other than maybe like the inside of the Death Stars and Star Destroyers, kind of approached that level of polish. And if you think Coruscant looks cool with kind of its Art Deco design that is heavily featured, and Cloud City did it first, and in such an interesting way, and the set so well captures the design of the rooms, and I really like those grill pieces, the 1x2 grills that are used
Mm-hmm.
kind of stacked interchangeably. And it's been used and done before. We've seen it in mocks, but it's used to such a great effect in this set. And it just like that dining room scene in my mind needs to be its own set. But
Yeah,
that one
we
that
haven't
we
got.
got in the Cloud City
Yeah,
was perfect, right? So I think that's just a really really fun set, and I'm totally on board with you. I agree that I think history will be a lot more kinder to this set, or will be a lot kinder to the set than maybe we were at the outset, because I think it's great. And one too that you could put on like a motorized Lazy Susan and just like let it
mm-hmm.
spin on a display. And I think
Yeah.
that would be like the ultimate way to display that set. And you just let it rotate like at a really low RPM, and just admire it for what it is. So
I'd be I'd be curious to know what some of our listeners think that have more recently got into Lego of that set,
mhm.
because maybe I'm just remembering it kind of being hated because we were collecting Lego when it came out and there was a lot of hype for a Cloud City set, and then that came out and everyone was kind of like meh, womp
Well,
womp.
like, what did you
So I
expect? I mean,
right, right.
I think it's a tough one to depict because you know it's the set piece itself. It's not. Well, I'd have to go back and look in like the Ultimate Ship Guide. I don't think I still have those books, but what its size compared to like the Death Star was. But this is a very large
Mm-hmm.
structure in Star Wars. And so it's impossible to capture it in minifigure form or even play scale form. And so what they did, I think, was a really great compromise. And for the listeners, I'm going to describe it real quick. They took basically a circular base, cut it into quadrants, and then made each quadrant a distinct element of the Cloud City set piece, but then kind of branched off from it. So, like you mentioned, there's the landing pad with the Slave One, so it kind of branches off. There's the carbonite chamber. You said carbonation chamber, which made me smile.
Oh,
The carbonite
it's a
chamber.
it's a giant
It's
soda
not a
stream.
soda stream, Grinch. um, but the
God, somebody listening while driving just got into like an accident because I said carbonation chamber. You cannot sue me for that, by the way. You listen and drive at your own risk.
uh, anyways, that kind of extends down to the bottom, but by and large, the model is designed to look like a miniature representation of Cloud City. To include in the center of it is kind of the stack of buildings that are in the
Mm-hmm.
center of Cloud City too. And so it's doing like multiple things at once. And I really like that set. So I'm a fan. Count me in.
I haven't disassembled. I've disassembled like a lot of my Star Wars UCS sets, but I haven't disassembled this one yet because like there's a part of me that's just like, yeah, but I could. I got room. I got room. I think I'm going
It's
to. By the way.
it's a great set. So yeah, I'll fanboy over that thing all day long.
So, how about you fanboy over this Ewok village, my friend? Because I think this is a maybe
A
even
little
an
bit of
equally
a dark horse.
controversial. Yeah,
So
yeah,
I really like this set. It's hard to pick a favorite set in the series, right? And
right.
because there's so much here, and I don't own this set. I just think that this one is so fun. You've got like the different structures in the Ewok village, the bridges between them, right? It's done to depict the victory sequence following the destruction of the Death Star 2. And I just think, in terms of like a Lego set and sort of a playability thing, you can't get much better than that. And it's one where if you had an ATST sitting around, if you had a few stormtroopers sitting around, it'd be very easy to turn it into a battle. I just, yeah, I think it's a fun set. It's not, crazy gigantic, but at the same time does quite a lot with what you get there. And one that I'd love to see explored again in the future. So we'll talk kind of maybe not missing, or when we talk through the missing sets, I might throw in a fourth category and talk through sets that should be revisited. So, but I
I
just think it's a really fun set. So yeah. Anyways, what are your
I'm gonna
thoughts?
I'm gonna but actually you here, but actually West, it portrays the build up to the Endor battle because it has like the dinner scene where they're gonna roast them over the fire. It has the Luke and
Mm-hmm,
Leia
mm-hmm.
moment on the bridge where he's like, "You're my sister," and she's like, "Oh my god, dude, I totally kissed you. This is awkward." Um, but I totally agree with your take, and I remember seeing this one in person at the Lego store when it first came out, and I remember I was so amazed by the battle droid arm bridge, which is a pretty common technique these days, right? But at the time, it was
Mm-hmm.
really kind of one of those first times that you saw it, and for bringing this full circle, both of these sets, I think it's a really interesting comparison to today because we've talked a lot about the Shire set, and this is where these sets were kind of classified as these like master builder sets. Like this one and Echo Base were really the reason that became a thing. But
Yeah.
to me, opposite of the Shire set, where the Shire and I'm calling them similar because they have the main focal point and then they have the kind of side builds next to it, right? That maybe kind of
Mm-hmm.
tried to make the set feel a little bit bigger. With Cloud City, you've got the ships and the a Bespin duel that can detach. With this one, you've got the Ewok village itself, but then you've got a scout trooper speeder, you've got a little tiny a catapult, the chair, there's a lot kind of extra going on here, right, with some of the kind of quote unquote play features. But in my opinion, those side builds are perfect with these, right? Like they really couldn't have done them any better. Where like the Shire, like it leaves a little bit to be desired. And so for me,
Yeah.
this is a case where it's done really, really well. And that's why I'd kind of argue like this maybe is Ultimate Collector Series, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And, I think this is where we talked about like that master builder distinction, right? Of like something that's really meant to be played with. I think we had this set when we were younger, if it came out around that time, I think we would have played, the crap out of this thing. It would have been,
Mm-hmm.
We would have had gouges in the Lego pieces on the bridge as we walked figures across. And, I'm sure the trees would have toppled over a few times and the village would have been, busted apart. But that would have been a whole thing for us. So I think it just evokes playability in a way that a lot of these sets don't. So I think it's really cool.
So we've teased it, but let's tackle this. What are they missing here? And I will preface this because I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a catch-all here to set us up so we don't go down this like long line of like, oh, well, this. It's hard to find specific scenes or ships, for example, that they're missing. But we talked so much about all the sub themes that kind of exist here, right? And how there's the helmets, etc. So obviously you could find different areas. Some of the notable areas that we found were missing were, for example, Endor landing pad, Nebulon B frigate. We got the same as the Bespin Duel, kind of the more exclusive release of that. Bespin Duel, for another example. We just got a Mon Calamar home cruiser ship, right? But we don't have a actual ship of that. And then, of course, the one thing I think we're really missing, West, though, truly stands alone from all those is Luke's land speeder.
Yeah, it's a shame that Lego hasn't. I just feel like that's low hanging fruit. So,
right, like we should be getting one every 2 years.
Lego, come on, guys.
Okay, that's a joke. But yeah, so there is there is kind of Luke's land speeder aside, there is obviously some like different kind of, oh well, we didn't get this in a diorama, we didn't get Hoth Echo base in a diorama. They did kind of that like pre-diorama thing, but we didn't get like the diorama. All that aside, is there anything that really stands out for you?
That's a tough one, right? Because like you mentioned, it is hard to find these missing sets. And so, the two that I contributed to this list are the Bespin Duel set and the 2020 Bespin Duel set, and not missing from a perspective of we don't have it, right? But one that I think should just be a widely released set. So in that regards, I think we're missing it, right? And I think we kind of mentioned and touched on that enough. The one that I kind of contributed that I think is maybe more original to that is we really haven't seen much from like an Endor style landing pad with the shuttle coming in.
But we did. We got the was it 2002? They did the final duel set. They had I think it was Final Duel 1 and Final Duel 2, where they had the Emperor throne room, but then they had, I mean, yes,
it was a hallway.
For all extensive purposes, we are missing this set. But I believe it was from the landing area, right? I always assumed it was, but maybe it was from the Death Star.
Yeah. No, I think it was from the landing area.
They meet on Endor, right?
Right. And Luke hands Darth Vader's lightsaber, or Darth Vader's looking at the lightsaber, right?
I mean,
he's
it's a like 6x8 plate with like 4 bricks attached to the bottom for feet, and then like a prefabricated, Mars
like
mission gateway,
yeah,
door piece, and then a railing. Like that was, I think it was 60 pieces.
Yeah, nothing groundbreaking.
So no, they have not done an Endor landing per se, but I just wanted to kind of catch you off with that one.
No, but I don't know what they would do for that, right? Like I don't know if they could do something in MIDI scale. I don't know if this is like a diorama that they could do, right? So like that's a tough one, and I don't have a great answer for it. But Grinch, what about you? You mentioned the Nebulan B and the Mon Calamari starship.
I think the easy thing is like Luke's lightsaber too, right? Like just
Yeah.
like the helmet series was kind of an easy box to check. Just like let's do the light speeders, you guys. There was lightsabers. There was enough backlash about that gift with purchase that like you can argue there's a market for it now. But yeah, we didn't get a Nebulon B frigate. We did, just like the Bespin Duel, got kind of a limited edition one, but not widely available.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the Mon Calamari ship that we just got, the was it the home runner or something like that. But we haven't got a
A
play
home one.
scale home one. Sorry, home runner is that cheat guy. We we haven't got like a proper scale, minifigure scale, for example, version of it. But I did when
Now
we
they
were
did have
preparing.
they did have the briefing room and A wing, which is technically from that ship,
Correct. Right.
but you don't really realize it looking at it. I mean, it's
Right.
I don't sit there and go like, oh yeah, the Mon Cala starship.
I
So
think that was the 30th anniversary set too.
yeah,
But
a
yeah.
long time ago, right? But a really great scene with Mon Mothma briefing everybody, and
Mhm.
right before the end, and so, anyways, sorry.
Right before you talk like you were there at Nam, like right before the helicopters came to pick us up, right before the end.
Well, yeah, it was kind of that point, right, where everyone kind of says their final farewell before they go on the final last ditch effort.
So it was funny because we were writing the notes, and we were said, oh, this is from the start of the Tantive Ford boarding to the celebration on Endor, and we just got a Tantive Ford boarding set last year, ironically,
Mhm.
which kind of like, oh yeah, that good. I didn't, I wouldn't think that we were missing that set, but that makes total sense. And we still haven't got a proper celebration set, really, as far as I can tell. It's been referenced, right? You could certainly recreate it with the Ewok village to some extent, but what I really need is
Just
just a big
Darth
pile of
Vader on a
sticks to
pile
go burn Darth
of
Vader. Exactly. with the play action where you can flip him into a skeleton, and then Ghost Anakin appears, and it's all great. And then in a year later, they're going to re-release one with Ghost Hayden Christensen and piss half the people off and make the other half really happy.
It's like the Darth Vader transformation set, but it's just Darth Vader, and then you flip it around, and it's Darth Vader with a bunch of fire.
I feel
Oh
like
dear.
in like a Lego Star Wars game, they would make it so like you flipped it over and there's some chicken wings, and then like a chicken popped out of it. It was like, oh, but I want to pitch you an idea if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Missing sets. We talked about how there's a lot of sub themes to kind of capture everything, right? And one thing that would get me excited for Lego Star Wars again, because when I was kind of going through the list of 261 sets, it was maybe a little bit exhausting. When I got to the sub themes, that's what kind of excited me. I'm like, oh, the helmets, like, oh, they should do
Mm-hmm.
lightsabers. Oh, they should explore, like the planet series that they did. We didn't really talk about those kind of like microfighter planets that they did, where they were the tiny planets and they came with like the minifigure. But if I could pitch this to you, the idea would be, bear with me here, you would have to, it would be a whole new scale. It'd be called the Space Series. And the idea would be to have a series of ships that were to scale to each other and had their own scale. So I imagine you could have like the Executor Star Destroyer maybe somewhere around the length of the UCS Star Destroyer, and then have a Star Destroyer maybe a little bit, that would be considerably smaller than that, and you could maybe surround it to like maybe one of the Death Stars that they've done. But then from that point, you would have TIE fighters that were to scale, and you could have a really tiny, just micro build, maybe,
I
depending on
think a
how big you
stud
go.
would be the scale of a TIE fighter to the Executor.
You might have to play around with it a little bit. Maybe you don't use the executor.
Maybe
Maybe you
don't
just
use the
use
executor as your
right.
massive scale, but even
Maybe
yeah,
you just use the Death Star, or sorry, a Star Destroyer, and then you get the Falcon, which is maybe 3 times the size of an X-wing, right, and more circular, obviously. But the whole concept would be to set up um, massive space battles on a whole new scale. And I don't
yeah,
want to spoil Lego Masters Australia, so this is your warning. Skip ahead 2 minutes. But in Lego Masters Australia Season 1 finale, the two of the builders made a giant capital ship and then built the scene around it of a bunch of small ships and a bunch of action scenes. And my first thought was like, wow, that would be so cool in Star Wars. And so just kind of creating a whole sub theme around like the starship, because the space battles are what's really cool with Star Wars, right? Where you could have a kind of like 2 scale setup, and I could just picture seeing it at a convention hall somewhere.
yeah. No, that's an interesting concept. I would even pitch, if I may, a return to the minifigure scale starships, but in a UCS style format, where it's this is like the definitive X-wing. I wouldn't call it play scale, because play scale implies that not corners are being cut, but that it's kind of the scale isn't perfect. I would try to make the scale as accurate as possible to a minifigure, using a lot of the building techniques that we've come accustomed to in the UCS series, and sets designed to incorporate minifigures in kind of a more compact way, right? A lot of the play sets for these sets, and it's, I think, the most notably distinct in the new U-wing that they're releasing this year, but the minifigures are lying down instead in the cockpit, right? That was like a very early Star Wars thing. Um, and they're, and clearly still a Star Wars thing for Lego. But
They'll do it in
you know,
Marvel
we
too. Don't worry.
we kind of got to like we have some very definitive versions of the X-wing, right? That I think it was a 2018 version or 2017 version of the X-wing that has Wedge and Luke in it. That's the one with the weird helmet that has the clear visor, the orange tinted visor on it. That I think Lego realized was not a great idea. Um, but these are very definitive figures, definitive sets. One of the things I've wanted to do with my version of that is change it into the Rogue One colors. I know it's outside of the scope of the original trilogy, right? But I think that would be really fun. The TIE Fighter from Solo, I think, was like the definitive version of the TIE Fighter, right? Like it'd just be really cool for Lego to kind of put a seal of like, not like a collector
Definitive
seal on it,
edition.
but yeah, like definitive edition, or like, this is the model series or something like that, or um, I don't know, I don't have a good name for it, but I'm liking kind of the branching out. I don't necessarily like the logo that was just announced, the Star Wars logo. I'm not a huge fan of those type of things, but I think like the dioramas are fantastic. I missed the Endor one. I need to pick it up. I think your idea of like taking the lightsaber line and making that more of a thing totally makes sense, right? And even like the MIDI scale starships, I think, are some of the best versions of those capital ships that we've seen. I think that could get, I didn't need a Venator UCS. I know a lot of people wanted one. I think a Venator in that MIDI scale would be awesome. Or like I think they are doing the Acclamator, aren't they? So they have the Acclamator.
Yeah.
Um, one of those droid control ships from episode 1 would be great. There's so much that I think those guys can go do. So
West, can I hit you with a hot take real quick before we move on to some data to finish this up?
absolutely, shoot.
Be careful what you allow. Um, I have to admit it. While I was going through the set list, I was missing a couple things, and I think I'm a prequel bro. I there was no ATOT, there was no Geonosis, there was no Clone Wars, and like I wasn't getting as excited about some of these sets as I thought I would, and I feel like some of my trouble with Star Wars recently is like when you watch the trilogy from like episode 1 to 6, like you kind of feel like you went back in time a little bit, and I know it's definitely a limitation of
Hmm.
technology, right? But even when you watch Solo or Rogue One, for example, you feel like the universe has gone backwards, and especially when you even get out to the sequel era, you're like, is this the technology feels so dark and gray and different, and to me, Clone Wars is peak Star Wars, and it's just yeah, it's just missing some excitement from some of these sets for me. So you can disown me as a brother, or you can accept me, and we can move on.
No, our age group, right? I was 9 when episode 1 came out. Uh, Attack of the Clones came out in 2002, and Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005, right? So that was definitely like peak Star Wars for us. I remember uh, going to the theater to see Revenge of the Sith with friends from school,
And me.
like as soon as we could. It was like right after school because I think we got the early showing because we didn't
On
want to
Thursday.
like fight. Yeah, I mean we were there like right away, and one of the first times like I made an effort to go to a movie like the day it came out because I was like I cannot wait any longer than this. Um, no, those are foundational movies for us, right? And what you bring up is I think
And
an
I'm three
okay
years
thing.
younger than you, right? So I think it's
Yes, right.
maybe
So if it was
you were
foundational for
9 and I was
me,
6, right?
right,
Yeah.
it was incredibly foundational for you, right? And so yeah, the original trilogy was amazing. I felt that way too. I've kind of struggled with it because you go, like you said, it does feel like you kind of go back in time. I This is where I sort of struggle with Star Wars. We're gonna kind of break away from Lego for a brief minute because you brought this up. This is where I struggle with Star Wars because on one hand, you see them attempting to create a visual DNA between things in the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, right? The
Hmm.
Arc 170 Starfighter, for example, has the S foils that pop into attack position a lot like the X wings do, right? And they're technically, if my Star Wars nerdum is correct, made by the same company. And so you see sort of again that connective DNA between the Arc 170 and the X wing, as an example, right? Um, the Venator is supposed to look a lot like a Star Destroyer, right? And at the end of Attack of the Clones, we see unpainted ones floating around as they're assembling parts of the Death Star, and
Revenge of the Sith.
um, that's the correct movie. Yes, we see the unpainted ones, and they look like Death Stars, right? The V wings sound like Tie fighters, right? Where I
Hmm.
think I struggle with it is when they include those revisions in canon outside of just visual connections, and they're like, well, Star Wars technology isn't actually that technological because of the way it was depicted in the original trilogy. And it's like, no, 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 like that doesn't make any sense. And like you guys are basically just retconning the fact that the original trilogy was made first and then the prequels came second, and the prequels had better visual technology, and so George Lucas couldn't help himself. And it just, that's where I think it's like you start to see the facade of Star Wars. You get a peek behind the facade and you find out it's all kind of just, it's not as fleshed out as you thought it was. It's thinner than you thought
Hmm.
it was, right? And that's where it's like, oh, the original trilogy feels like a complete story. The prequel trilogy feels like a complete story, but it's setting something up, right? And so it just, it's a struggle. I think ultimately George bit off more than he could chew. I think this is a really good example of why it's best to not wait 2 decades between the creation of two, technologically heavy stories. George Lucas himself he's really more of, he's a pioneer in visual media and incorporation of visual effects into movies, right? Not necessarily a pioneering director in terms of storytelling, certainly not with the way that they do line writing for the actual stories and script writing, right? I mean,
I hate sand.
Harrison Ford constantly picked fun of George, apparently, for how poor the writing was on the original trilogy. And so it's just like it's a man with a vision, right? But I would say you see the prequels as like, what happens when you give the man with a vision, like, no boundaries and unlimited resources, and he creates what he creates. But you're right, like there's a really distinct visual difference between the series, and you see the sequel trilogy kind of try to fix some of that. But at the same time, too, the problem with that was Disney didn't have any vision for what they wanted it to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
As evidenced by the fact that while it's a very controversial movie, The Last Jedi took some really distinct steps to kind of take the story in one direction, and then they very quickly in The Rise of Skywalker just undid all the work that The Last Jedi did, right? And you're like, oh, okay, like
which you could argue The Last Jedi undid all the work. Yeah, episode 7 did,
you
right?
couldn't, right? The Last Jedi, I would say you could say like tied a knot in all of it, right? It kind of created a distinct. Don't get me wrong, there were some significant structural and pacing and storyline issues with The Last Jedi, but for them to just undo it all so quickly in The Rise of Skywalker and not kind of stick with or commit, right, is just I think a huge foul. But we aren't talking Star Wars on this podcast exclusively. We're talking about
Maz
Lego.
Kanata would say, that is a story for another day, and you will never hear that story.
But I think you're right. There's a lot of fun with the prequel trilogies. We've covered those episodes. We covered them last year. For any listener who's interested, we went through episode 1, 2, and 3 and talked about missing sets and kind of the excitement of those series. There's so much there, right? And we're gonna get some. The rumors are there should be some really great prequel stuff yet to come this year. So I'm very excited to see where that plays out. But yeah,
can you answer me one question?
Absolutely.
If you could go to any era and visit, which era would you go to?
Of Star Wars?
You can only visit the planets that were visited in the movie. Allah, you can't say I want to go to Coruscant and go to the sequel era.
Oh, that's tough. I mean,
I just want to hear you say prequel.
And I don't know. I haven't really thought of that. I mean, the prequel planets were fantastic, right? Here's what I will throw out there, because I don't really have a great answer prepared for that, and because the original trilogy was filmed all on Earth, so like other than Dagobah, which was the soundstage,
and the
right?
prequel trilogy was filmed in my dreams.
Well, I just mean they used real life shooting locations for everything in the original trilogy, other than Dagobah, and some of the soundstage.
They used
stuff.
Minnesota for Hoth. I've lived there. It's identical, spitting image.
Here's what I would say. You know how people are using AI tools right now to like create trailers for movies, where they'll be like, what does the Panavision Super 70s trailer look like for this movie? Or like if this was done in, they'll do like the Italian Harry Potter, characters, like, how they'll do that in AI. Here would be an interesting challenge of AI is take the visual scenery from the original trilogy and apply that to the prequel and sequels, and show me trailers from those movies using the visual styles and themes of the original trilogy. Because I think that's, again, going back to my comment of like George Lucas kind of having unlimited power, right? Was that he's like, instead of being limited to like a desert in the somewhere in the world, he's like, well, we'll just make it red. It's Geonosis, it's red, right? But like clearly filmed on a digital stage, whereas like they had to use Tunisia for A New Hope and for Return of the Jedi, right? So And there's probably real places in the world they could have gone to have filmed Geonosis, but he was using and leaning into that digital capability more
Probably
so.
Australia.
So potentially, right? I mean, there's probably some places in the U.S. that could have worked for that. There's some places in, Dune was filmed
Like
down in
Moab,
Jordan, and
Utah.
yeah, absolutely, right. So I think sometimes, we've talked about this with Tom Alphin, the brick architect. Constraint can sometimes lead to more creativity than less creativity, right? When you sort of are unconstrained, it can be challenging to build. For creativity to flourish, sometimes you need something for it to fight against, right? Maybe much like the story of the Rebel Alliance, but
That was beautiful.
going full circle.
Theme data. Let's break it down. So for the YouTube viewers, if at this point right now, I will pop up the graph that we're talking to. For those on the podcast audio, we will have it posted to the Instagram. We're just looking at the average and median price per part of Star Wars sets over time, because this is always an extremely hot topic. West, what do you notice?
I mean, if you look at the average price per part and the median price per part, it stayed very consistent, right, throughout from 2000 to 2025. People like to talk about the Disney tax, right? But it's pretty much somewhere between 10 to 15 cents. So,
Yeah. And what's interesting is that the highest for the average is 16 cents in 2022. But if I were to remove 4+ sets from this, it would completely level out. There was a 4+ set that cost like 40 cents per part. And even back in the year 2000, again, I didn't remove those type of things.
yeah.
So back in the year 2000, when they had like the minifigure character packs, that average price per part back then was 15 cents, then 12, 13, 11. And it just kind of went back and forth between 9 and 13 for a while. So it really kind of went down and maybe got to the lowest point at 2006 or 2007, and then kind of maybe went back up to like that 12 range and just kind of sat there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the median is very similar too.
And interesting, right? Because that price per part dipped right around or right after Revenge of the Sith came out, right? And so arguably probably the lowest time that we would have seen original trilogy sets being released. Does that have anything to do with the price per part? Maybe, maybe not, right? But I'd have to go back and look at the back catalog of dates, but I would imagine that 06, 07 timeframe is probably not having a ton of those sets around at the moment, or not. Those wouldn't be the flagship Lego Star Wars sets, for example.
Yeah, and even the median price per part too. Again, we've looked at the average and the median. The median helps smooth out some of those issues you see where you've got a really poorly priced set dragging up the average. If you look at the median, the way that you can look at it is half the sets are going to be over that price point and half the sets are going to be under that price point. We're seeing that similar trend repeat now with the median, where it kind of started at a point and is starting to go actually down, where the median price to part is over here at 10 cents this past year. So really kind of interesting. It doesn't feel as necessarily taxing as one would think.
One, and you've done some more data, and so I want to just kind of speak to that, because you mentioned the 4+ sets being, really skewing this data set, in a significant way. And the other one that you mentioned was the buildable figures. And so if you look at the median versus the average, right? The average spikes in 2015, right? That was around the time that we started to see those buildable figures introduced. And consistent through about 2020, starts to drop again, and then like you mentioned, those 4+ sets came out and really just spiked the average up over the median there. So totally makes sense when you look at the data and kind of what is a contributing factor to um, these the average and median splitting so aggressively as we see that depicted.
So the other thing I did, and again, I will put this data on for the people on YouTube, and we'll have it posted to Instagram for everyone else, is the sub themes. You would expect a different split, right? Of like you were talking with the buildable figure specifically, but for me, I would think that the UCS collector series would be way lower, right? Because typically when you think of like the bigger sets, you think of a more
Lots of
favorable
small
part to
pieces, yeah.
a part to price count, but the total is 13. UCS is it's sitting there at 11, almost 12.
Right.
Um, the mini building sets and even the helmet collection, the Technic sets from back in the day, right? The stuff like the mechs, obviously, but the Starship collection, some of the miscellaneous set, the Microfighter, the dioramas are really the more favorable price to part ratio sets out there.
And you mentioned the total was 13, right? I think a little misspeak there, right? That's the average. So while the UCS
Sorry, the
series
average
is
of all the data.
right below the average, what you're mentioning is it's pretty much right there at the average. If the average is
Right.
13, and the UCS are right there at 12 cents. So they're not maybe as favorable as one might think. And like you mentioned, there's a
You would
lot
think
more.
they'd be 8 or 9 or something like sub 10.
But there's a lot more favorable sets out there or series out there.
So just kind of some highlights. This will not be posted on the YouTube if you're listening on there. Most expensive set at retail. The West. Do you have any idea what those were? So just some other interesting data points here. The most expensive set at retail, West. Do you want to share what the most expensive sets were?
Yeah. So the most expensive set at retail was the UCS AT-AT and the UCS Millennium Falcon, which actually surprised me. I don't know why the AT-AT just kind of came and went for us, but I just don't
Awesome
remember it
set
being
though.
as expensive. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I mean gorgeous, right? Like, and the way that the legs move and everything, like such a cool set, and the way that you could pack in snow troopers too, right? Like, I mean, just incredible. Don't remember it being anywhere near as expensive as the Millennium Falcon. That just feels weird to me.
Most expensive retired set
Is Cloud City 2002.
at $10,000 more or more. I put the or more part because if you look at like average, like aggregates, like they pull a lot of like kind of like missing minifigures or, heavily damaged no minifigure set. So I did not use that. I just went on and like you can't find it for under $10,000, like new sealed.
That's insane.
What set had the most minifigures?
The most minifigures to date is the UCS Death Star in 2016.
Yes, the infamous remake of the Death Star. And then the most pieces was
And the
the
most pieces, the UCS Millennium Falcon at 7,541 pieces, which for quite a while was also the largest Lego set in production.
right. And that one's funny because somebody could sit here and argue that it's actually a Force Awakens set. And that's where we end our review of
They would
the
be wrong.
original trilogy. West, any final thoughts before we head over to Brick Mail?
No, this is a fun series. There's so much here. Grinch and I had talked about breaking this down movie by movie, like we did the prequels. This was kind of another way to attack this, elephant that we tried to take one bite of at a time. Man, 261 sets by your count, Grinch. An incredible series to look at, and certainly a defining one for the Lego group as a whole.
Absolutely. Let us know too in the comments if you preferred this way or the individual Star Wars sets or Star Wars movies. Spoiler alert: we will probably talk about Rogue One individually, but we'll probably break up kind of Star Wars in other subcategories like this going forward. But if you liked the individual movies and you're like, no, please do it that way, just let us know, because those are actually ironically like 3 of our worst performing episodes. So we split this into one big one, so it was just a little bit less total Star Wars topic. So, but this is our May the 4th special this year, talking about Star Wars. So excited to make some May the 4th purchases, or had made some May the 4th purchases, I should say.
Well, and I would also add for any listener, please let us know what notable original trilogy Star Wars set comes to your mind, what your favorite is, and then what set you believe is missing, because that would be a really great conversation to have with the larger audience. Really curious to hear what people have to say. Yeah.
And with that, let's head over to some brick mail. Brick mail. All right, so that was our discussion on Star Wars, the original trilogy. Obviously, Star Wars is a beast of a theme to cover, so rather than just cover it all in one episode, we're going to do our due diligence with it. Last year we did the prequels. This year we're doing the original trilogy, and I know we'll get to like the sequels and the expanded universe as well at some point. Maybe do a deep dive into just the Clone Wars. As you can tell, I'm a fan of the Clone Wars. So let's go ahead and get into some brick mail, though. We have our first one here from Arthur Goodchild. I've really enjoyed your podcast. I've enjoyed your episodes on modulars, and when you have guests, I've been listening to all of your episodes, and I hope that your kid is doing well. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you for writing in. I know they believe this was your first time writing in, so thanks again for writing in. We appreciate it. My kid is doing great. She's just now kind of like grasping stuff, so not quite ready to build Legos, but getting that kind of foundation done. Glad you enjoyed the modular episodes. That's definitely one of our more popular episodes, and I'm really glad we split that into 2 again, because we wanted to make sure we did our due diligence there with such a large and a really important topic as well, right? We want to make sure that we're doing these topics due diligence. Chico writes in and says, "Hey guys, I just discovered your podcast after officially coming out of my dark ages about 2 months ago. Wow, you are fresh, my friend, and have enjoyed listening to every episode from your backlog. Listening to all your episodes gave me major FOMO. I am sorry about that, because I am very empathetic to what you are experiencing right now, my friend, especially after looking up retired sets from my dark ages, and it quickly turned from FOMO to terror of spending that much on Lego. But I've loved the podcast, and now I look forward to listening every Monday on my way to work. I had one question for you, Grinch. I know you collect Marvel and was wondering if you like the new style of Iron Man helmet. Personally, I have had some of the original helmets from 2012 or 2013 and just love the look of them. I think Lego tries too hard to be realistic sometimes, and in my opinion, this is one of those times where they had it right at the beginning and now it just looks weird." Well, you're in luck, because as far as solo folks go, you're stuck with me today, so I can definitely get into this question with you. I did want to go back, though. I know you didn't ask for it, so I did want to recognize that, but just give you some advice here about like retired sets. If you go down that road of buying retired sets, just remember that they're retired, right? And don't drive yourself crazy of like, well, I got to get it now, because if I don't get it now, it's going to be, $10 more expensive in 2 years. That might be true. But there's always going to be something you want now. There's always going to be something you want in the future. Split your list. Make sure you don't not buy stuff now that you want just to buy something that's retired, because then if the stuff now that you want retires, you're going to be stuck in the same kind of cycle. So when I came out of my dark age, I identified kind of the areas that I wanted. Um, I stuck very strictly to that. Sometimes I did stray from that. I either had good reason or had bad reasons, and I ended up kind of refocusing myself if I went too far over the deep end. um, but just you had to be self-aware with it, right? You really had to be self-aware with it. For example, I got all the Western sets because they were like my favorite sets from my childhood. That was very expensive. Um, I also wanted to get like all the ninja sets, but I told myself it had to be one or the other. So I went with Western because, oh man, it's just, there's too much. There's so much Lego out there, right? There's more Lego minifigures on this earth than there are people. So there's a lot. So just have some grace for yourself, right? Just be patient and just, set boundaries, set goals that you can kind of work towards. You don't have to get everything all at once if you end up buying retired stuff. Also, do not be afraid to buy something used. I was not in my dark age, but I did not get Ninjago City, for example. A few years ago, I was like, I really should have got that. So I got it, and I got it on Bricklink used. And the person had literally taken it apart piece by piece and put it back together in the bags that it came from the box. Not the original bags, but just he labeled a Ziploc bag like bag one. So when I went to build it, it was the identical experience other than opening a new box, right? I opened it, stickers were applied, but I opened it, grabbed bag one, opened the instructions, started with bag one. I hearted that seller right away and have bought other used stuff from them because of that. So don't be afraid to buy used. When you find a good used seller, make sure you favorite them and buy from them specifically, because you can sometimes get burned. So usually if there's no text there listing, missing this or missing that, it's usually not missing anything, but you never know the conditions. So don't be afraid to ask questions. A good seller should always be willing to take the time to answer your questions, especially if you're buying something, for a couple $100s, right? They can take 2 minutes to answer your questions. And if they don't and they're sketchy about it, then find somebody else. That is the benefit of living and shopping in a capitalistic society. There is a lot of competition out there from you sellers. So your actual question that you had for me, the unsolicited advice that I just gave you, uh, you said, how do I feel about the newest Iron Man helmet? I actually really like the new Iron Man helmet. Um, so it sounds like you originally collected some of the original ones from 2012 and 2013, which are very nostalgic, especially for me playing like the superhero Marvel game, the Lego game, the TT game. Just running around New York with that Iron Man, right? For example, but you probably weren't around when I think it was 2020 when they switched it to a helmet that did not open, and it was just a very plain kind of helmet with a blank face that they would print whatever on, whichever one that they were using, and that was bad. I really did not like that. So when they came back and they updated it to a new helmet, I liked it. Part of me likes it better just because it's a little sleeker than that old one, but I totally understand and get what you mean by, saying it maybe feels a little bit more realistic. It might be just because you weren't there for kind of that like transition period of like going from this one to the bad one and then to this one being like, oh my God, this one's way better than that middle one that we had. So maybe that's why I feel that way. But I get what you're saying. That original one is nostalgic for sure, but I do think the current one that we have is a happy medium and a kind of good spot for it, because the other one did look a little bit kind of comical, if you would. I imagine it probably similar to like, I don't know, maybe this isn't a bad example, but if somebody were to be collecting Star Wars now for the first time and they had the updated Stormtrooper helmet, that infamously was a bad update, right? Or an update people did not like from the one prior. I wonder if they went to something different. A lot of people would be like, no, I want that one. It was a little bit more comical. It was a little bit less accurate. It was a little bit weirder. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good example, but that's just kind of how I feel. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you, Chico, for writing in. And that is a wrap of another episode of AFOLs Welcome. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you are listening to the show. Please write us a review on Apple Podcasts specifically. That really helps out the show. And if you would like to write us, please email us at afolswelcome@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at afolswelcome. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.